Everything is Fine by Great 78. Chapter 8. Weasley. Draco was flummoxed about this strange woman's identity, and he knew Hermione felt the same. The gorgeous, willowy blonde stepped forward, away from Weasley, who still had her around the waist from where they'd been snogging and groping each other only moments before. Her glossy, straight blonde hair caught the glittering lights from the chandelier above them. "Sorry, yes, of course. Where are my manners? My name is Luna Lovegood." "And I'm Harry Potter," Draco muttered to himself, but still overheard by Hermione. She tilted her head to give him a reproachful look, then turned back to the other couple. Forgive me, Luna, you said. That's a very unique name, Luna Lovegood. Were you always named that?" Hermione asked delicately. The blonde woman looked at Hermione as though she'd lost her mind. "Of course. I presume so, at least. I mean, it's the name my parents gave me, if that's what you're asking." "Yes, your parents," Draco interjected. "What was your father's name again, Luna?" "Well, I don't think you've met my father, but his name is David," Luna said, pouting prettily. "No, Luna, that's not right. It's Zeno," Weasley spoke up. "Xenophilius, actually." The beautiful one fixed Weasley with an incredulous stare. "I think I know my own father's name. His name is David, and my mother is Sarah. They're both still alive in Luton." Hermione gave an ingratiating smile to the pretty woman. "Our mistake, Luna. It's just that we knew someone with that very same name years ago, actually. By chance, do you know anything about magic?" "You mean like Houdini, David Copperfield, that sort of thing?" she asked with the tiniest sneer of amusement. "Luna, what are you on about? I mentioned being a wizard right after we met. I even made a comment about what a beautiful witch you were." Weasley's face was a portrait of incredulity. "Yes, I know, and I told you that I liked how well you were wielding your magic wand, how long and thick it was, remember? It was the first time I thought you were doing some kind of role-play thing." The woman pouted prettily at the red-haired git. Hermione and Draco exchanged a look of cringing disgust before she turned back to Weasley. "Ron, I don't understand. You knew this wasn't the Luna Lovegood we knew, and yet you still slept with her, immediately after the two of you met." The ginger's face was having a go at becoming even redder than his hair. "Miney, Ariel told me that she was my soulmate, and that her name was Luna Lovegood. I didn't really need to know anything beyond that. It's been a few years since school ended. I mean, yes, Luna seemed a bit different than how she was back in school, but people change. You, of all people, know that. We talked for a few minutes, a minute or so, and one thing led to another, and..." The woman named Luna butted in. "And then he was asking me to suck him off, so of course I said sure, and..." Draco gagged as Weasley tried to talk over his apparent soulmate. "And we made beautiful, passionate, meaningful love to each other, as soulmates do." He finished with a frantic look at the blonde woman to try and get her to stop talking. "But Ariel says she's been here a few days. Surely you've had a chance to talk with each other more deeply in that time." Hermione tried again in complete confusion. "Yes, a little bit," the woman agreed. "We know each other's favourite foods and favourite sex positions, and, that about covers it. We've been rather busy, you know." "Sounds smashing," Draco nodded. "Yeah, this bloke gets it," the other Luna answered with a knowing wink and a smirk, jerking her thumb at Draco. "Listen, I don't mean to be a pain, but I was in the midst of a scrummy chat with the British ambassador to Egypt. As it turns out, his son and I met and shared a hotel room during a rather fun holiday weekend in Ibiza a few years ago. And now, the father and I are getting a bit acquainted. Do you mind if I—" She gestured to the door. "Not at all," Draco said. "We'll catch up with you later, Luna." "Pleasure meeting you, Rico, Harley." The beautiful woman flashed them a brilliant smile and left, closing the door behind her. Once the other Luna had clicked the door closed behind her, Draco and Hermione turned to Ron with wide-eyed, disbelieving stares. "I swear on Dumbledore's grave, I had no idea that she wasn't the Luna we knew. I mean, she said her name was Luna Lovegood, and she's a dead ringer for Luna." Draco snorted in disbelief. "Sure, if the Luna Lovegood we knew grew 5 inches taller and started dressing and doing her hair like she's posing for the centerfold of Maxim magazine." Hermione turned her astonished stare at Draco now. "How do you know what Maxim magazine is?" Draco found himself suddenly blushing almost as red as Weasley was. "Granger, I'm dead, not blind. Besides, you heard Ariel. I truly am interested in learning about Muggle things, and that magazine has excellent articles." Spare me." Hermione rolled her eyes at him, then went back to Weasley, whose expression seemed to indicate that he was more interested in learning about this Maxim magazine than in discussing the identity of his soulmate. "So, you set right to work, maneuvering this witch into your bed, before you'd even exchanged 10 sentences, most likely." Privately, Draco felt that Hermione was giving Weasel far too much credit if she thought he'd strung together 10 sentences in front of that bewitching woman, but that was neither here nor there, he supposed. "Listen, Miney, let me be worried about my soulmate, and you just worry about yours. After all, apparently you left your soulmate out there in the party to come here and chat with this Poncy ferret." Weasley sneered in Draco's direction. Draco held his breath as, collectively, all of the pixies in his head did the same. Would she deny his status to save her own reputation with this wanker? He narrowed his eyes and cut his gaze sideways to watch her as she prepared herself to speak. "Actually, Ronald, a bit of a funny story, that. Turns out, we're actually—" She looked helplessly to Draco for assistance. He could take it no longer. Draco stepped closer to Hermione's side, placing an arm around Hermione's shoulders as casually as he could, but lightly, just in case she turned around and punched him in the chest. It turns out, Granger and I are soulmates," he said, with as much confidence as he could muster. "The fork you are!" Weasley coughed out, clearly torn between laughing and yelling in anger. "It's true, Ron," Hermione said in a gentle tone. "Shut up, Miney!" Weasley bit out, clearly deciding to choose anger. "Listen, you can fork right off with that shirt, Weasley. There's no need for you to get—" Draco began, taking a threatening step towards the ginger-haired man as his hand caressed Hermione's bare shoulder gently. Weasley shrugged his tuxedo jacket off to the floor and untied his bow tie as he started towards Draco, muttering under his breath angrily. Draco balled his fists and raised them to block any incoming hits, waiting for the other wizard to strike first. "Both of you can take your forked-up, misguided, chauvinistic attitudes and calm yourselves down!" Hermione seethed as she stepped between them. Draco backed down immediately, pulling at his cuffs angrily to straighten them inside his jacket sleeves. He fixed Weasley with a forced smile, born from years of practice. "You don't need to believe it, Weasley, but rest assured it's true." Draco smirked at him. "Fuck this!" the ginger git muttered, snatching up his tuxedo jacket from the ground and shouldering it back on. "Hope you two enjoy this little soiree I've put on. I need to get back to my soulmate, who actually is suited for me, unlike whatever forked-up nonsense this shirt is." Better hurry up before she boffs that ambassador fellow right there in the living room. Draco slipped in, and was rewarded by the smallest of muffled giggles from Hermione. "Shut up, wanker!" Weasley said angrily, as he wrenched open the door.
"Ron, wait, there's one more thing,"
Hermione said, reaching out to touch her friend's arm before he left. Weasley closed the door again, and looked down at her fingers brushing his jacket, looking slightly offended at her touch. She pulled back nervously. "What? Let me guess. You and Malfoy are expecting? He's already got his little Spudflood chore up the duff, is that it?" Weasley spat out nastily.
"What? Ron, there's no need for that kind of... Wait, are you saying chore, like a task you have to complete? Or are you saying chore, like a woman who..."
Hermione broke off, unwilling to complete the thought out loud. Weasley narrowed his blue eyes, shooting daggers at her. "You know exactly what I'm saying." "Why, you little piece of shirt," Draco said, not bothering to remove his jacket or loosen his tie, as he surged towards Weasley, fist raised in anger at the impugning of Hermione's character.
"Draco!"
It was only the flash of fear and... something else. What exactly it was, he could not say. In Hermione's copper eyes, that stopped him from pulverizing Weasley's entirely punchable face. A second later, they were alone, as the door slammed shut behind the Gryffindor asshole. "I'm sorry," Draco began, staring down at the carpet. "I shouldn't have allowed him to speak to you like that." He looked up, catching a fleeting glimpse of that expression again, the one that looked so foreign and out of place on her face. He wanted to capture it in his memory, turn it over in his mind, solve its riddle. But she was already moving on.
"Don't worry about it. He's a hothead. He has been since I've known him. He'll come around, but he always was the jealous sort when it came to you," she said, walking over to the fireplace to stare into the bright orange flames.
Draco swallowed a disbelieving huff of laughter. "Believe it or not, there were plenty of times that I was envious of him over the years."
She did not bother disguising her own laugh of disbelief. "No offense meant to Ron, but what in the world were you envious of? I mean, don't get me wrong. I love Ron when he's not acting like a complete asshole. Ordinarily, when he's not faced with one of his greatest fears of all time, like he was tonight, he's a good and loyal friend to have in your corner, but why, exactly?"
"Why was I envious?" Draco frowned, walking back to the blue velvet sofa and settling against one of the remaining pink pillows. "I should have thought it was rather obvious. I mean, you just said it."
At her blank look, he continued, picking up his scotch and swirling the amber liquid in the glass thoughtfully.
"He was a good and loyal friend to you. I imagine that loyalty and friendship went both ways, yes? Were you not a good and loyal friend to him all those years?"
Hermione turned her head to peer at him over her shoulder. Her look of dawning comprehension was slightly heartbreaking. He looked away and gulped the scotch, then pulled another double from the bottle.
I can't say I have ever really experienced that fully. Goodness, loyalty, strong bonds of friendship."
She frowned and turned around fully to warm her backside. "But Crabbe? Goyle? You were friends with Blaise and Pansy and Theo as well."
"Vince and Greg were followers, not friends. Don't get me wrong, we were friendly with each other, but we were never on equal footing. In my heart of hearts, I knew they only hung around me because of my name. Pansy was a lone wolf. She always kept people at arm's length. I think she felt safer that way. She worked very hard at not caring for anyone. And Theo and Blaise were great friends, but mostly with each other. I enjoyed being around them, and I think they enjoyed my company as well, but they always preferred their time as a two-ship."
"Were they a couple?"
she asked. "No, not that I was aware of, anyway. Not to say that Theo might not have been open to it, but it just wasn't who they were," he said, his eyes drifting to the darkened window, his mind lost in old memories.
Hermione smiled wistfully. "Believe it or not, I know that feeling. Harry and Ron were great friends to me for much of our time at Hogwarts, but when things got rough, I was almost always the first one tossed out of the group."
Draco came to himself and looked at her warmly. "You were too good for those Pratts, Granger," he smirked.
She smiled back. "Possibly. But as I said, I do understand feeling a bit jealous of the kind of loyalty they had for each other."
Warmed by the toasty fire, Hermione crossed back to the sofa and sat down, pouring herself another finger of scotch and sipping it. Draco noticed that, whilst she did not settle immediately next to him, nor did she leave a giant chasm of space between them.
"Not to mention the closeness of his family. You were an only child as well, isn't that right?"
He nodded. She seemed hesitant to continue.
"In a way, that was one of the most difficult things about the war ending. It sounds odd, I know, saying that there were negative aspects to ending a war, but when everything was over, Harry had Ginny and the Weasleys, Ron had his family and the admiration of a nation, and he soaked that up like a sponge, and I had an empty home to go home to. My parents were living an alternate life. They didn't even know who I was anymore. Yes, I was hailed as a hero, but did you ever notice, in every article and every headline mentioning me, the papers always were careful to label me Hermione Granger, Muggle-born witch, the Muggle-born Hermione Granger, Muggle-born Lioness Granger.
I always did like that one best." Draco smirked at her.
She smiled back a bit sadly. "That was one of the better ones. But they never pointed out that Harry was a half-blood or that Ron was a pure-blood. Why did it matter who my parents were?"
Draco was alarmed at the tears that sprang suddenly to her gorgeous copper eyes.
"Why?"
she asked again, her voice breaking slightly. "Hermione, no, it didn't," he said in a soft voice. Before he could stop himself, Draco had withdrawn a handkerchief from his inside pocket and slid towards her on the sofa, drying her cheeks with one hand as he put his other arm around her in comfort. She leaned into him, trying to school her emotions and stifle her tears, even as they came harder to her eyes. He hated that fucking Weasley git for calling her a mudblood whore. How could anyone who claimed to be her friend want to hurt her like that? Before his mouth could filter itself, he'd expressed that to her. "Hermione, you don't have to subject yourself to him ever again if you don't want to. He was bang out of order for calling you that." She lifted her face from his shoulder and gave him a watery smile, staring into his silver eyes.
"It's all right, Draco. I've been called that before. Well, maybe not Spudflood, but the other version, the real word, you know."
He looked away, unable to meet her copper gaze. "Yes, I know. And, again, I'm sorry for it."
"It's all right. You've apologized back on Earth. I know you don't feel that way now," she said kindly.
"I don't," he said in earnest, looking back at her. She drew in a deep breath and exhaled, picking up the bottle of scotch by the neck.
"Let's go home. I'm tired. Do you suppose there's a back way out of here?"
Draco's heart pounded at her use of the word home. The brain pixies were running around in his brain, colliding with each other a bit frantically. "I'm sure we can find a way." 15 minutes later, they were back in their little gingerbread house, teeth cleansed and brushed, pajamas and robe on. He bid her good night and lay awake for a long time, turning over the events of the evening in his head. One thing was for certain: the added wrinkle of Ronald Weasley and the girl named Luna was unexpected. But most of his focus was on something Hermione had said that they'd skipped past quickly in the moment. Now, however, his mind dissected, analyzed her words repeatedly. When he's not faced with one of his greatest fears of all time, like he was tonight. What did that mean exactly? Obviously, she didn't mean death. Ariel had said that Weasley had been in the good place longer than either of them, so clearly he had come to grips with the idea of death at some point. Draco was certain that he himself was not one of Weasley's greatest fears. Weasley's actions towards him throughout their years at Hogwarts, as well as in the final battle, had proven that. Not to mention, Weasley had testified for him, although his testimony had been weaker and clearly more reluctant than that of the other two Gryffindors. So, what else could it have been? Draco played back the memory of the emotions in the man's eyes tonight. Anger and envy. Why was Weasley envious of Draco? The Gryffindor wanker had a mansion, the optics of wealth, admirers, everything he'd perceived Draco as having on Earth. The only thing Draco had was Hermione. One of the Weasleys' greatest fears of all time. Surely, no. Why would Weasley ever have had a reason to be envious of Draco and his relationship with Hermione Granger back on Earth? That train of thought was a dead end, if ever there was one, Draco mused. He was certain that the small crush he'd had on Granger back in school had been entirely one-sided. Sighing, he rolled to his back, punching his pillow behind his head as he stared up at the ceiling. Unexpectedly, another mysterious facial expression swam to the surface of his mind, that of Hermione's when he'd been ready to pummel Weasley into the ground for calling her a mudblood whore. It had been a bit of fear, yes. Draco was sure he'd looked like a crazed lunatic at those words, and she'd put herself in his path, after all. But there had been something else. That look of... was it surprise? Admiration? Possibly affection? Desire, the brain pixies offered hopefully. He scoffed to himself. Unlikely. But the idea wouldn't leave his mind, and the more he tried to ignore it, the richer and more realistic his visions of her became. The feel of her skin under his hand, and her gorgeous body pressed against him as they danced. Her moans as she ate something particularly decadent. Her hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. Her wet lips and her throat as she tossed back the glass of scotch. And that look she gave him in that split second. In his mind, this late at night, it was easy to imagine that the look was one of lust, of wanting. Before he could stop himself, he was fully hard in his pants. It took barely a few strokes of his rigid length, his eyes screwed tightly shut as waves of pleasure rolled over and through him, remembering the way she had looked tonight. His eyes popped open, suddenly hyper-aware of the fact that Hermione lay just down the corridor from him, and might not even be asleep yet. Salazar's ass! How would he possibly explain to her what he'd been doing, if she happened to wander out of her room? Sorry, love, just thinking of you and having a quick wank is all. He huffed in annoyance at himself. The next problem he faced was the mess. Gone were the days of a simple vanishing spell. Merlin! How did muggles do this? He stood, careful not to get anything on his blankets or the floor. What a complete and literal cock-up, he thought to himself ruefully. Once he'd made his way quietly to the toilet, he cleaned himself carefully, then spoke softly into the darkness. Change clothes to new pajamas. A fresh pair of bucks briefs replaced the old pair. Breathing a sigh of relief that hadn't been more difficult, he washed his hands quietly. He shouldn't make that mistake again, getting caught up in the moment like that. He pulled open the door, coming face to face with Hermione, who held one fist up beside her face, as though she'd been about to knock. His shock must have been quite evident on his face.
"Draco! Oh, I'm sorry to surprise you. I couldn't sleep, but I couldn't find you in the living room. Everything all right?"
"Of course!" His voice was much too shrill. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Of course, Granger. Just getting a drink of water. Didn't want to bother calling you-know-who." He tried for a smile. She smiled back. Fuck, he thought to himself. Tonight's nightgown, though longer and more covered up than the previous one, skimmed her body tightly. It was a rich navy blue silk that looked like flowing liquid against her skin. Despite his earlier promise of never doing that again, he resigned himself to cementing this new and lovely vision of her in his mind, to go with the other images he carried around like the world's most torturous photo album. This place might be heaven, he thought, but damn it all to hell. He was going to go spare, torturing himself with this witch's presence for the rest of his death. Thank you for listening to Everything is Fine by Great78. If you enjoyed this story and would like to read more like it, please find me on Archive of Our Own or follow my Spotify channel, Silver and Copper.